Okay, so very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a privilege to be here this afternoon talking to you on a subject which is extremely dry. It's more dry than any conceivable subject. It is so dry that not only the audience, but the speaker himself or herself can fall asleep. As is the case with me, I'll start with a historical anecdote, not a creation of my dry mind, which would further elucidate the point I was making, that the subject is so dry that the speaker himself or herself can fall asleep. In the late 18th century, when William Pitt the Younger was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he became Prime Minister at the young age of 24. And he's also credited with the invention of income tax, the much loathed income tax. He said that William Pitt the Younger said that once he was asleep and he was having a dream. And in his dream, he saw that he was making a speech. And when he woke up, he found that he was indeed making a speech. Okay, so, so that's how it is. Now, jokes apart, central banks are not a matter of joke. In India, as in every other country, a central bank is responsible for quite a few things, the most important of which are managing inflation and ensuring financial stability in the country. The point, a lot of economists and central bankers, ex-central bankers like me, have been making for a long time is that a central bank is able to discharge those functions if it is financially independent. We have to bear in mind that a central bank lies at the apex of the financial system, and the central bank is the central monetary authority of any country, but it's a financial institution. It has got a balance sheet and it has got a P&L. If any institution, let me make this general statement, if any institution performs any type of commercial or financial activity in any country, provides economic services to the country, it must have a balance sheet and a profit and loss account. India is in many ways an exception because sometimes we claim that economic laws do not apply to India. And that's why you keep the railways, without a balance sheet and a profit and loss. And that's the reason why the financial health of the railways is a matter of debate. No two successive railway ministers will tell the same thing about the financial health of the railways, which is really a shame. Now, this is unfortunately not the case with any central bank, including the Reserve Bank of India. Now, what we are going to say here is that if a central bank is to discharge its functions well, then it must be financially strong. The real issue here is whether the central banks are really strong and whether the Reserve Bank of India, which is the central bank in our country, is financially strong. If it is not, it loses its independence with consequences that we all are aware of. But this is really a debate not just in India, worldwide, particularly in the wake of the financial crisis, global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, when central banks in developed countries like the United States, the UK, not so much in the UK, but in the Europe, have been expanding their balance sheet, printing money with a decent name for printing money. They call it quantitative easing, right? Like they say that when an airplane crashed, you have to have a decent name. The politicians and bureaucrats that they say. So a bureaucrat was given a promotion for having a description of a plane crash. They said it is uncontrolled descent into the ground. Okay? So quantitative easing is another name for money printing, and money printing is something which all central banks at some point in time of their existence did. So what we're going to see in this presentation is whether the central banks should also have some indicators with regard to their financial soundness, just like the commercial banks have the regulatory ordained capital requirement for ensuring their financial health. Now, the balance sheet of the Reserve Bank of India is in two parts. I mean, those who are students of economics or finance would know that there are two parts. They call it issue department balance sheet. The other is banking department balance sheet. Issue department balance sheet is that part of RBI's balance sheet which describes its monetary liabilities and the assets backing monetary liabilities. And one of the principles which are followed in India, and of course which is a legacy of our past, is that any assets of the issue department cannot be used to meet any other liabilities except for the currency liabilities. This is for ensuring monetary stability. This is the balance sheet of the so-called banking department. You will find both in the balance sheet of the issue department, you have assets denominated in foreign currencies, gold, as also assets denominated in domestic currency, that is rupee. Similar is the case with banking department, which of course is slightly more elaborate. So here you have liabilities other than the currency liabilities. You have deposits of banks, governments, so on and so forth. And on the asset side, you have more or less the same thing. You have gold, you have foreign assets, you have rupee assets. And the size of the balance sheet of the two departments are more or less the same on 30th of June, for which we have the latest data for. The issue department and the banking department balance sheets are the same size, so which gives us some idea about the total assets of Reserve Bank of India's balance sheet. What you are trying to see here is that with regard to the total assets, as is the case in a commercial bank, whether the Reserve Bank of India has sufficient capital and reserves to cushion the risks arising out of its business. Okay. So what are the equity items? So these are the equity items. Let me not get into the details of it. Essentially, we have exactly 7 types of equities. But what are more important is, the first 3 items, or the first 4 items are the real equities. The third, the other 3 items, the CGRA, EEA, and IRA, are really adjustment items. Let me not get into those technicalities. So what is important here is whether the sum of the first 4 items provides significant cushion for the assets of Reserve Bank of India. So the last column shows you the equity cover for assets of Reserve Bank of India. It has, in a range of, let's say, 10 to 13% over the last several years. But in the last balance sheet, the number has fallen to a little less than 10%. Okay? We'll come back to this number a little later. But if you take all the 7 items, the equity cover increases to 32%. But the last 3 items are really adjustment items, so they are not exactly in the nature of equities. Some of the structural aspects. In the balance sheet of any central bank, you will find domestic assets as well as rupee assets. And domestic assets and foreign assets. And the foreign assets in the case of Reserve Bank of India, as in the case of any other central bank, are the foreign exchange reserves of the country. The more the contribution of foreign assets to the total assets of any central bank, other things remaining the same, the stronger is the central bank, the stronger is the support of the central bank to the purchasing power of the local currency. Now, in our case, what happens is, starting from a high of around 90% several years back, it has fallen to 66%, which means that Reserve Bank of India has not been increasing its foreign exchange reserves in the same proportion as it increases its monetary liabilities, as was the case compared to what was prevailing a couple of years back, which means, qualitatively speaking, the RBI's balance sheet support to the strength of the rupee has decreased. I mean, this statement can be made very easily. And it is no wonder that over the last one year or so, we have seen the rupee depreciate significantly, and as we speak, there is a downward pressure on the rupee. RBI's earnings, you'll find that commensurate with the change in the composition of the RBI's balance sheet between structural composition between domestic assets and foreign assets, the earnings from foreign assets have come down, whereas earnings from the domestic assets have gone up. Yeah. the one important thing here is, and this is true of not just of the Reserve Bank of India, but of all central banks, that what proportion of the profit that is transferred to the government, because government is the sole owner of the central bank, how important that is that profit from the government's fiscal point of view. We'll find in India this number is really low, which is a good thing, which is a very good thing. There are examples of many countries where the governments, in their eagerness to extract as much money as it is possible from the central bank, has actually financially weakened the central banks. And there is at least one example available in Asia where a particular central bank of a country had to be liquidated because of its financial weakness. I'm talking of the Philippines. Similar thing happened in many Latin American countries in the 80s and 90s. But in India, I mean, there is a good deal of, I would say, maturity on the part of politicians not to extract the kind of pound of flesh, if you like, from the central bank in order to support their fiscal programs. Okay. I will not get into that. This is the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. As you know, that in the wake of the financial crisis, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, under the quantitative easing program, has been expanding its balance sheet and acquiring all kinds of assets. The soundness of those assets is something which has been disregarded in the government's and the central bank's eagerness to expand money in order to resuscitate the economy. Let me get into a little bit of theory of it. Some people say, even some economists say, that the financial soundness of a central bank is no issue at all. They say that a central bank is nothing but a part of the government. So a central bank's liabilities can very well be met like any other liability of the government by raising revenue or by raising taxes. So a central bank central bank's balance sheet does not have any independent existence at all. Okay? But the examples of this kind of central banks are the central bank in the United States, which by that I mean the Federal Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve System. But if you go to the other extreme where the central banks are not considered as a part of the government, a central bank does not regard that its liabilities will be met out of the revenue being collected by the government. An example is Bank of Japan, and a most recent example is the European Central Bank. European Central Bank is easily understandable because unlike central banks anywhere in the world, European Central Bank is not connected with any particular country. Okay? It's a central bank which is formed by all the countries which are members of the Monetary Union. Let me not get into those issues. But one thing I would like you to remember is that on a central bank's balance sheet, you have assets denominated in local currency, you have assets denominated in foreign currency, and obviously a foreign currency assets bear more risk. So here is a trade-off involved. You need more foreign currency assets in order to preserve the purchasing power of the local currency. But if you have more foreign currency assets, a central bank bears more risk. So there's a trade-off involved. And in the interest of more foreign assets being on the balance sheet of a central bank, it is necessary that a central bank's own risk-bearing capacity should also be higher, which means its own equity and reserves as a proportion to the total assets should be higher. I'll not get into that. Well, the conclusions are more important. The central banks are different from other banks. Central banks are also financial institutions. Central banks can expect capitalization from the fiscal authority in the event of large losses. Let's understand the situation. Suppose Reserve Bank of India incurs huge losses, okay? As a result of which its capital is eroded to a large extent. What do you expect the government to do? Do you expect the government to recapitalize it? Yes, the government will recapitalize it, no doubt about it. okay? But the process will not end there. The moment Reserve Bank of India incurs huge losses and there is an erosion in its capital, the government will have to recapitalize it, and there are extremely innovative and creative instruments being used in India for recapitalization that will be used again. But the matter will not end there. From that point onwards, there will be a bureaucrat in New Delhi who will say, okay, we have recapitalized the Bank of India. From now on, all the expenditure that is being incurred with the Reserve Bank of India will have to send the file to New Delhi, and those files will be cleared, and then we will be able to incur those expenses. Or what will be more easy, a senior official will come and have an office in Bombay to check all the payments or all the expenditure by Reserve Bank of India before it happens. It will happen in India. So central bank's integrity, financial integrity, is extremely important for a central bank to operate independently. This is a truism which no country can afford to ignore. But the process of recapitalization is likely to be, is likely to be far less benign than assumed. That was the point I was making a little earlier. Central bank, independence and credibility will be at stake when losses are debilitating. Capital adequacy for central banks, leaving aside the volatile element, should be about 20%. Now, we saw a little while back that right now the capital adequacy, by taking the core equity components, is only 10%. But benchmark here in this regard is around 20%. So one can say that Reserve Bank of India, like many other central banks in the whole world, including ECB and Federal Reserve Bank of New York, are a little undercapitalized. So this is more or less what I wanted to say. So thank you very much.